here. All right. Well, we're here. We're here. Guys, thanks for joining me. This is Jeremy at Classic Guitar Rock, and I'm super excited that we're having this get together. By the way, Ross, I've been kind of plugging this in my various platforms and things. So I've got with me Ross Warner, who has written an awesome book. I have it right here. It's called American Standard, Cheaptrick, From the Bars to the Budokan and Beyond. So for the next 40 minutes or an hour, however long, unless Ross gets sick of me, right? But for the next while, we're gonna talk to Ross about this most excellent book. And first, Ross, the question I've got to ask, and this is not even about Cheaptrick yet, because I think I can only speak for myself, but I think a lot of people think they have a book in them, right?
Yeah.
They like to think they could write. I know I've thought that. I've thought someday I'll write a book. So talking to people who've actually written books, I'm always kind of in awe. And so my first question is, how do you write a book? I mean, it seems so scary and daunting a task. How do you do it? Because you've written several, by the way.
Not several. I wrote two that have been published. I mean, I don't think that the writing is as scary. I think it, it's the editing, and then it's also all the rejection that kind of that comes with it. I mean, we live at a time where I started writing in the mid '90s before they were called blogs, obviously. Yeah. So it's great that anybody can write. I mean, I'm not talking about like people reporting information isn't true. I mean, it's great that they're blogs, and they're great that they're letterbox reviews. And it's great that people can write long form essays on things that they love. So I mean, I think writing isn't so hard. It's just getting it out there. And I think trying to get an actual book published, that was more frustrating me than the writing. I mean, and I think again, you could get a book published now that'd be self-published, and I don't think anybody would know the difference. My book was self-published. It's not, but I mean, I don't know. It probably wouldn't be in stores. Probably people could get it online. But if you do, as somebody pointed out to me, I mean, the Spike Lee film Black Klansman was written by a guy. He self-published that book, and it became obviously a movie. So, I think if people are interested in writing, they should definitely do it. I think there's really, I don't know if it's a marketplace, but there's certainly an avenue for almost everything out there. I don't want to say like everybody now can be a creator or whatever, but I mean they kind of can. And I think it's just a matter of getting it to the right people. Whether it be a subreddit or a blog. I mean, there's really a place for everybody. And that's one thing that I think has worked well with with Cheaptrick, because they still, even though to some people they're this band that was big in the '70s, obviously they still have a hugely fanatical following. There are definitely people who I know are pissed that I didn't cover this, or or why didn't I talk more about the band before Robin got there? Which is a totally valid point. And like I said, that's why I was happy that Brian's book came out, because I could not have done that. That's not even in my wheelhouse. And so I was glad somebody else did that, because I would not have been able to even touch that. So when people say, well, why didn't you write about 1974? I was like, well, that's not what the average person knows. And
exactly
what the average person knows is Budokan. And that was something, I mean, I'd originally wanted to write a Bloomsbury book just on Budokan, which is amazing that there isn't a 33 and a third on Budokan. There is on almost every other influential album. And I think, I mean, one of the reasons probably is that there's so much still kind of murkiness about it. I mean, it isn't like artificial. I mean, they didn't pump in the crowd noise or anything, although Jack Douglas did mix it a little bit louder. But it's one of the few live albums where we don't know which came from which show. I know only Bunny Carlos would really have that information. He says his notes on that were buried, and I did ask him because they played roughly the same show all 5 nights in Japan. But so there are people who absolutely like me who want to know, oh, this came from this night, this came from this night.
Well, and I want to dig into specifically Budokan, and there's so much I want to talk about here. I'm going to show the book one more time. I'm going to tell everyone it's on Amazon. I know it's on Amazon because I went and I looked at it on Amazon. Ross was kind enough to send me a copy, but guys, this is very much worth the read if you're a Cheap Trick fan.
It is,
Now,
it is in stores. I mean, I know,
and
I
it's
don't know.
in stores too. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
it should be in physical bookstores. Again, that's the only difference really between my first book, which was a small publisher, where for it to be in stores, they have to order it on demand. Whereas this, in theory,
Yeah.
it should be at bookstores.
Well, it's a great book. So if you have a local bookstore, check in the music section, right? And chances are it could be there. But it's an excellent book. So my question, and you're we're both in our 50s. Ross is actually a little younger than me.
You would know from looking at me.
I would say that most of the and I could be wrong. I would say most of the hardcore Cheap Trick fans that still follow the band today are probably older than us,
Yes.
Ross.
Yes.
Because by the time we got into them, they'd been around for a while, I'm assuming, right? So
yeah, no, I mean, I put that in the book. I mean, I definitely, I was 7 when Budokan came out. Like I put in the book, my first memory of Cheap Trick was, I'm sure I saw some of those actual commercials for them. Was hearing, I heard Surrender in that, in the Up the Academy movie, the Mad Magazine movie, which, I did talk a lot about Over the Edge, because it is a big deal in terms of getting their music out there. But I was definitely, when that movie was on cable, we had cable in the 80s. I was definitely too young to see it. So that was how I knew Cheap Trick. And then as I put in the book, or maybe I allude to it, that really when I kind of rediscovered them as more than the band that had, singular hits, was in the late 90s when I was living in the East Village, and they put out, the complete concert with the second half of the show. And that's when I was like, oh, okay, well, they played Southern Girls. Okay, they played Auf Wiedersehen. Okay, well, they played, I'm trying to top of my head. I mean, some of the much of the darker stuff that, that originally a lot of people loved about them. And there are people, of course, who, think the first album is the best album, and that, that's the material that they think about the most, the O Candy and the Taxman, and, Ballad of Teenage Violence. And
so what was it, Ross? Why Cheap Trick? What made you want to write a book about them? What was it about them?
I thought at the time, and like I said, I didn't know that there were, I did not know about Robert Lawson's book, or maybe I did. I bought it, but I didn't know that Brian was coming out with the book. So at the time, I thought, oh, well, what would be a band that I could write about that, hasn't gotten a proper biography? And again, Doug Broad's book is awesome. It covers 4 bands, and then Reputation is a Fragile Thing is largely out of print, even though it's very highly sought after. So that's what made me think that. And I thought, well, what's a band that's, to some people, on the fringes, and to other people, completely mainstream? And then as I started writing it, I kind of realized, well, being a Deadhead, I certainly understand the obsessiveness. And I've gone back and forth with Bunny Carlos. Obviously, he started as a taper. We told him he never saw the Dead, but he has, recordings of theirs. I mean, so kind of the obsessive need to hear every note, comparing versions. I realized that was something that I could relate to. I listen to a lot of bootlegs. I mean, I have a lot of bootlegs of Cheap Trick. So that certainly was it. And I thought that maybe I was removed enough to maybe, I don't even know if I was going to be objective, but I was removed enough to write it.
Yeah.
I see Edwin Diaz walk somebody. That's why I looked down.
Yeah. So and one of the books, I can't remember which guy wrote this book, but one of the books, I believe, is called "This Band Has No Past." Right?
Yeah, that's Brian.
And so explain this whole. Okay, so I have the first album on CD, and the particular pressing that I have does not have those liner notes that have that. So explain to those that might not be familiar with it.
Sure.
In the first album, there's a bio of the band in the book, and it's called "This Band Has No Past." So just explain that to us so we'll understand what that is.
So what happened is that before the first album was released, Eric Van Lustbader, who went on to become, he was the guy who inherited Robert Ludlum's, Jason Bourne character. So he became he became a pretty well-known writer. He was hired. He worked at Epic. He was hired to write a biography of Cheap Trick that, it was tongue-in-cheek, but it was very falsified. And it began with those words, "This band has no past." And it talked about how they had met in Europe, and it talked about Bunny Carlos being from Venezuela.
Yeah.
It talked about Rick Nielsen being a cartoon character. It was pretty farcical, and it did kind of like throw the gauntlet down for Cheap Trick. I don't even know. I mean, I saw the actual notes from Ken Adamany to Eric Van Losbader. They met in New York. He wrote a draft of it. I don't know that they took it that seriously, and to them, it became. I see Diaz walked another guy. It became like a bit of an albatross for them, because they kept getting asked about it. The reality is that they, were 4 Swedish guys from Rockford, and their image, whether it be Rick kind of clowning around in the Bowery Boys Hunts Hall outfit, and Bun obviously with the short hair, in the mustache, and the the thrift store outfits, and Robin and Tom being kind of sex symbols.
Yeah.
They definitely did not look like 4 Swedish guys from Rockford. So I think, like I said, they try to keep that up for a while. I know that a lot of the interviews that I drew upon in the book came from local papers, Lively Times from Rockford, the Mad City Music Sheet, and the people that knew them back then. I mean, they knew who they were. They knew they were from Rockford, and Rockford was not doing great in the mid '70s, to say the least. So I know Bun had said, well, the people of Rockford are mad. We kind of don't claim them. There wasn't a lot to be proud of. Now, of course, they're synonymous with Rockford. Rick is, I used to say he's the Jimmy Buffett of the Midwest.
Totally. Yeah.
And they're synonymous with Rockford. So if people don't know, that was the actual bio that was issued. This band has no past, and basically for the first couple years before they broke through, this was what they were. They were trying to keep this up for a little while.
And I'm going to read one little quote from your book, if I can. This is how the book starts out. Your preface starts out with a quote from Bob Kane, right? And people who are into comic books like I am, you'll recognize the name of Bob Kane. He's the creator of Batman. So I love this quote. There are 2 stories. There's a mythical story you create and kind of make up, and then there's the truth. And the myth and truth become clouded after 30 years. And I think that's a super appropriate quote for Cheap Trick. Starting with that, this band has no past, and Rick's penchant for pulling people's legs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like I said, I mean, he was, I mean, it was interesting. I'd read interviews with him. I mean, he has been telling those stories for a while. He is, as Bunny Carlos would say, he's been in character since the mid '70s.
Yes.
I don't know that he took it all that seriously. Some of the stories, I mean, about like how they got the band name, or again, where they met, or kind of the the image that they were 4 misplaced characters. I mean, the reality is that Tom and Rick were really close, and Brian kind of uncovered. I mean, they were really like kind of best friends. They went to Europe together in 1968. Rick, who is certainly not known for his psychedelic usage, talks about doing Owsley acid in England and hearing Beggar's Banquet, the White Album, for the first time. And again, that was something, as I got into the book, that I did find so fascinating with Cheap Trick is the image, because in some ways, somebody mentioned, I think it was on the Rock and Roll Grad School podcast, it's like they were kind of hiding in plain sight. I mean, I don't know how much they really thought about it at the time. As I put in the book, they were just getting to the next show, and they were, the most Midwestern, grinded out, every night they were out there band, playing. And what I thought was the most interesting thing I learned was about the Midwest. Brian covered it, just those bars that, would stay open until 6 in the morning, or they'd have to go to different bars, or the wet t-shirt contest. Just thinking the pictures of them, seeing what's it called? Seeing them like, playing these like small places with like, with like low ceilings, just playing super loud, playing covers that people, unless you knew the move. I mean, I'm not definitely cool enough to have said that I knew much about the move before listening to Cheap Trick, but that was definitely, their big influence, which is kind of like perfectly Cheap Trick, because it's the Beatles, second generation. You know, it's
Yes.
the Beatles as interpreted through Roy Wood. So people like Ira Robbins and what's it called? Carrie Baker. I mean, there were people that definitely, they would they would know them at the time. But and that was another huge thing with the Cheaptrick, is they were so often compared to the Beatles, and they did love the Beatles, and yet they had to almost kind of like hide behind loving them, because that was the easiest comparison for people.
Exactly. Yeah. So one of the things that and he's an interesting character in the Cheaptrick story, but also in the Ted Nugent story, the Twisted Sister story, Molly Hatchet, and that's Tom Werman.
Sure.
So Tom Werman, who produced In Color, their second album,
and their
third album, he's gotten a bum rap from, I don't know if Ted's ever talked bad about him, but pretty much everyone else that's ever worked with Werman says that he neutered us, right? So there was this, I feel bad for Tom, actually, because on the one hand, these albums that he produced were usually really successful, because his whole approach was, we got to get on the radio.
Right.
But tell us what Cheaptrick's thoughts were of the Werman albums versus like the first album, the Jack Douglas album.
Well, I mean, again, Jack, and I know, Jack, I sent him a copy of the book, and Jack, I know he has he's taken issue with any book that suggests that he didn't discover Cheaptrick, right? So Jack Douglas is hugely important to the Cheaptrick story. Without Jack Douglas, they probably don't get a record deal. They actually had Jack Douglas sign on as a producer before they even got the Epic deal. And Jack Douglas is hugely important to them, because yes, they love Aerosmith. That's one nice. Diaz struck him out, and that's one. So now I can breathe a little easier. They were melting down as I was talking to you.
Good.
Exactly. What I don't want to try. I'm showing my receding hairline here, but
that's right.
But he obviously did Aerosmith. It's funny to read a lot of interviews. Like back then, they would refer to him as like a heavy metal producer. Like that was heavy metal Aerosmith. Yeah. So Jack's album that he did. And I think he deserves all the credit in the world. And he worked on Budokan as well, and they love him. But what I did put in the book is that, Tom Werman, I don't love, In Color. But at the same time, Rick especially, has always said in print kind of that the album, like you said, was neutered, without their knowledge, what little I know about Rick. Yes, he absolutely, was on the road. He was hearing the mixes for Heaven Tonight, like, through the phone, but I don't think for one second that Rick Nielsen didn't know what was going on in those albums. I mean, he was, as Bun said, we didn't like particularly I Want You to Want Me, which was kind of the bane of their existence.
Yeah.
We didn't like that arrangement of it, but I don't think it was put out without their knowledge. I think, like you said, Tom Werman, who did write a book, and who I spoke to briefly, well, not even briefly, for a while, it was very nice. And, he did talk about, he said, we share some views, and he was like, I don't really talk to Ted Nugent about politics, but Ted and I Ted and I are actually, we still remain friendly. But Dee Snider, they re-recorded Stay Hungry, that album. So in some ways, he was a part of that, that kind of compromise that bands have to make, right, to get on the radio. Yeah, he absolutely saw himself as, a guy who would, get them to the next level. And I spoke to Jim Charn from Epic, and that was definitely a conscious thing. So I think that's why Werman was brought on. But with the Douglas album, it is certainly very raw. It's got all of the material that, he wanted them to put out there, kind of this kind of very dark. It's a New York album, right?
Yeah,
it's recorded in New York. It's got, again, Taxman. It's got Oh Candy, which on the surface is a light poppy song, but it's about, Marshall Mintz hanging himself, being an addict. So it's the most dark thing, which in, I think, many ways is so perfectly Cheaptrick, right? It's a sugary poppy package, which, inside is, kind of dark and sinister. So that album didn't really sell at all, but, in some ways that becomes even more of a, something for people to like, that the fan could say, well, see, that's the hardcores. I jokingly said to people when I started writing the Cheaptrick book, like, one day I hope they get commercial enough so people can be like, yeah, that stuff's kind of commercial, but you got to go back to his early stuff. That's where the real raw stuff is. Like, the way I look at like Hunter Thompson's Prince Jellyfish manuscript. So yeah, that album didn't do particularly well. And then Douglas was only signed for one album. And then, Tom came in and they did In Color, which they had never said this explicitly, but that contains a lot of their most enduring songs. I mean, if you look at the track list on that, you have Hello, and of course, that was the album that they had always said they felt was the most kind of saccharine. And the late Steve Albini, of course, actually recorded that with them, which he talked about before he passed on a Cheaptrick podcast, where I think at the time, I don't know that they ever were going to release it. I think it was around the time they changed management, and Cheaptrick was afraid maybe they'd lose the rights to some of their music. So that was, I think, the impetus for them recording it. You can hear it on YouTube, or I can send it to people. I mean, it's out there, and it's a raw version from 1997 of.
And I do want to throw this out because probably a lot of folks listening aren't diehard Cheap Trick.
Right? Yeah, that's kind of true.
so they know the hits, right? They know I Want You to Want Me and Dream Police and Surrender.
Was the Mike DeMond mentions?
Exactly. So I just want to tell folks this because this was my experience, right? So my first, let me think. My first real exposure to them, I can remember in 7th grade hearing the Budokan, hearing the I Want You to Want Me, like probably most kids in junior high, whatever. So that was my gate. I had the Budokan album eventually. I saw them live in 82, right when I think One on One had just come out. So I saw them live. And then over the years, and here's another point that people need to, Cheap Trick has never stopped touring. They are the hardest working band in show business,
right.
But here's the point I was trying to make. Sorry, it's taking me so long.
I'm here.
If you grew up hearing the Budokan version of I Want You to Want Me, and then you go hear the In Color version, you're going to puke, right? Because it sucks. That song sucks on In Color. But other than that, Ross, I love that album. In Color's probably my favorred album. Cheap Trick album.
It's funny. I guess you are right that I'm trying to think. I have so many different versions of it, and then when they re-released it, talking about In Color, different mixes. But yeah, I mean, it really, that is the song, and that is the album that Rick would always go back to, and they would trash talk it a little bit. I mean, again, you have to remember. I mean, they were recording so much in the beginning. I mean, literally. I put it in the book, and I made the analogy to like the late Ray Liotta's line in Goodfellas, or when he's talking about, Paulie basically says, I can curse on this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he says, fuck you, pay me. And Rick said that's been our policy. Like, we have a bad album, we tour. And again, it's taken different forms over the years. I don't, like I said, I mean, I went into this book fully almost embracing the fact. I mean, I did mention to their people that I was writing the book, but I kind of knew that they wouldn't have any interest in doing it. And as I said in the book, to reference another, Cheap Trick adjacent person, Cameron Crowe, it's kind of like that line for singles, that not having an act is their act. I mean, I think, I don't think Rick has any interest, and I asked Ira Robbins this, in being in a book, which is weird because he will get on a podcast, Tom will get on a podcast, Robin will, with anybody and talk about anything.
Yeah.
But I think with a book, I don't know this. I just think they maybe feel it's like, someone's kind of, making money off of their story. But just going back to I Want You to Want Me, just to make it more palatable for the mainstream person, I Want You to Want Me on the album does have the, crying part. And the imagery on the album, I'll mention the Mets here, is actually that picture was taken at Shea Stadium in 1977 during a rainstorm afterwards. So that's why on the back it looks like there's this beautiful little color, and 1977 Mets were awful. So I don't think they had much competition. But you have Tom and Robin looking very much like gigolos. I mean, on the front, and then you have of course Rick and Bunny on mopeds on the back. So the technical album is black and white, In Color and black and white. But that image did really appeal to people in Japan, and that's another big part of the story. Is that it wasn't. Again, I don't know that it was always a conscious thing, but Rick has always told the story. Well, we opened for the Runaways, Japanese photographer saw us, that kind of got us. I mean, I think there was a little more to that story. I mean, he wrote an article, which I was not able to actually see the article. I think Kevin Manny probably has it, but I saw like the cover letter that Rick wrote to Gaku Senka. So I put in the book that I felt like I was looking at, basically like the 18.5-minute gap from the Watergate tapes. Because it's referenced. You go to Wikipedia, anytime Rick talks, he says, "Oh, Japanese Music Magazine," and I'm like, he's constantly lying. That's why I appreciate, the reference to Bob Kane and Bill Finger, because I mean, I'd seen the Bill Finger documentary, and then I was watching, I don't know what, I think I was watching a DC thing on HBO Max, and that's where I saw that quote, and I'm like, that does perfectly define Cheaptrick, because I think after, it's 50 years now, but they really, especially Rick, I don't think he really knows the truth from fiction, but I mean, they will tell the story of "I Want You to Want Me" being a last second thing, and it wasn't. It was hugely loved by the Japanese girls, and ironically, the part that everybody remembers, the crying, comes from In Color. So that shitty, saccharine, neutered, finger snap, tack piano version that they hated was the thing that these girls latched onto.
And they're shouting it out.
Ultimately, every classic rock radio station, including especially plenty here on Long Island, and that's what everybody remembers. And, of course, as I put later in the book, there's a whole generation of people that only know them from the Beastie Boys, that only know them from, I remember hearing "Check Your Head" in college. And I remember I was in the back of my friend's car and I was like, is that Cheaptrick? And it's the first, literally, and when they say this is the first song on our new album, they are literally, introducing the first song on another band's new album. And that was, the Beastie Boys playing their instruments for the first time. So, I did ask somebody who wrote a biography, Josh Zwick, on the Beastie Boys, and he said it wasn't probably all that random. I mean, they know who Cheaptrick is. They took the samples seriously. Obviously, Paul's Boutique is all samples. So, but yeah, they were beloved for that album in what's it called, in Japan. That's how they got the Japanese shows. And the one thing that I've never ever heard from anybody involved with Cheaptrick that has been exaggerate too much is that the surprise that they had when they got there. I mean, all those stories about them getting there and being completely floored, being, Robin getting his hair cut off by a girl, then not being able to leave. I mean, there was an interview that Rick did with Jeb Wright that I put in there where he says, yeah, we did leave the hotel. And Bun has alluded that maybe some of the, the roadies, maybe went out with some of the Japanese girls, women, not girls,
right.
People ask them that, but they really were, gobsmacked when they got there. I mean, it was a plan for them to be there. It was a plan for them to do 5 shows. Ken has, which I thought, Cheaptrick nerds, I think, would love this, the list of what they were going to play, which includes "I Want You to Want Me." It's the songs that they hadn't played in a while. And then the show before, which is where the picture on the cover comes from, at the London Roundhouse, they played "I Want You to Want Me." I mean, it was reviewed. So the story that they just keep telling, especially, Rick and Robin, it was the last second thing. The promoter, we needed somebody to fill out the set. It had been a hit here along with Clock Strikes 10. That's just patently not true. And I think I also, to use another, pop culture quote, I use the Liberty Valance reference,
right.
Print the Legend, because that is, to me, one of the most fascinating things about Cheaptrick. I read it. I think it was one of the Budokan videos that somebody put, like, they have this great Cinderella story, and like the right hands, this could be like a great story, like kind of rags to riches, and myth versus reality.
So one thing that I really like in your book is from the beginning, right? You're kind of foreshadowing them going to Japan. You mentioned a few different times, we've got some fan mail from Japan. They like this in Japan. So, they didn't go to Japan until after Heaven Tonight was done.
Yes. They were doing it literally like, I mean, that part I do believe that Rick was listening to the mixes, and that's the album, the third one that I put in the book. I don't know that they like it, but they complain the least about it.
Exactly.
They were mixing it.
Woman album.
It was a Woman album, as was Dream Police, and they were mixing that, and it had not come out in the United States, including Surrender. So, when they went to Europe in '78 and they started playing those songs, people here hadn't heard them. So the version of Surrender that's recorded, it's either from the 30th or the 28th. They also played a show in Osaka. That was brand new. I mean, so the Japanese people, I think, what's my son sending me? I have no idea. I get my phone is blowing up. I can't be the only Mets fan people know. I mean, no, the Mets suck, but this is not the
He's,
part of it.
he's a Mets fan, and so the Mets just won, and so all
Yeah,
of his
he's
kids
a Phillies, and now they have to play the Padres there. But it's I this is one time I wish I wasn't. I would make the joke that my phone's blowing up like a meth lab.
Yeah.
But they get there, and those songs are recorded. The first night was recorded for a TV special, which is why there's video. I mean, I put in the book, even Eddie Trunk, who is, kind of a huge Cheaptrick fan, very accepted by Rick as kind of a, purveyor of the legacy. I put it in the book. He's got on the air and said, "Oh, it wasn't even meant to be an album. They just recorded it for TV," which is again not true. I mean, there were recording trucks there. Bun has his own audience tapes, which he recorded because he thought his family wouldn't believe how beloved they were. His drum tech Dave Mazzarelli was next to him, and they couldn't even hear each other. But I mean, they were planning on making an album. The difference is that it wasn't going to be a domestic release, and that's where again more Budokan cool mythology comes, because I'm not spoiling it for people in the book, but it was an import. Marty Scott, who ran Gem Records out here in Jersey, who spoke to me, helped distribute it. And so, that allowed it to kind of catch fire. I mean, eventually, I don't know that Epic knew what they had. I know that, when they heard the tapes, I spoke to Bruce Dickinson, who is not the Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden, but he is Bruce Dickinson and more cowbell, because
he's that.
It is him, but it wasn't. The funny thing is the reason his name is in the skit is because whoever was the PA that was looking for it, he had worked on a re-release of Blue Oyster Cult. He didn't record in the studio, and the whole character Christopher Walken plays is not anything like, at least not the Bruce Dickinson. As much as I love it, again, one leg at a time.
Yeah, he's just like everyone else, except once he gets his pants on, he
produces. Exactly. Cock of the walk, baby. But he, him and I spoke, and he actually worked on the re-release of Budokan. I mean, the tapes were pretty messed up. They knew that the screaming of the girls was a hook. They knew that was something that would absolutely get people's attention. They didn't really take it that seriously as they were mixing it. It was, again, Bun worked on it. Gary Ladinsky, worked on it, and Ken Ame would say he's kind of the guy that saved that record. It definitely has a very specific sound. I mean, I remember reading, Robert Christgau, who is the self-billed, and he's a great writer, dean of, rock critics, saying that it sounded like it was recorded in the big room at Carlsbad Caverns. I mean, it's not. They definitely mixed the crowd like it's its own instrument. When you listen to it, I mean, and it's great. I mean, it's like the best comfort food. It's like a bacon egg and cheese. I mean, when you hear "Surrender, I Want You, Want Me," or any of the songs on the original Budokan, or even the ones on the expanded, I mean, you just feel good. Even the Genius of Cheaptrick is Auf Wiedersehen, which talks so much about suicide, such a hard rocking song that sometimes you don't. And they never really, they weren't Bob Dylan. I mean, they have their own issues, and they work their stuff out through their art. But I mean, there was always a double entendre, triple entendre. Sometimes I think they were just putting, Easter eggs and breadcrumbs out there just to fuck with people, to see if they could even and I think that's one of the things that they probably liked about The Band Has No Past, and their shtick, because that's another thing that I found so fascinating, is that Rick is an awesome guitar player. Rick is a connoisseur of guitars. Rick obviously is a collector of guitars. His character, that kind of goofy-eyed Hunts Hall, which would definitely not be acceptable today. I mean, I'm sure people would look at that as if he's, acting like he's disabled or something. Was more, I'm a goofball who's not really trying, and yet the sounds that come out of my guitar are so amazing. Like, look what I'm doing. That was his thing. They were friendly with Nugent, for a long time. I mean, I don't think they necessarily have had a parting of the ways. I know Rick had said that they were asked to play the 2016 Republican convention, and he said, what are we going to do? Make guitars out of swastikas? No way, we're not doing that. So when people say they'll play any gig, that's the one gig that I can say I know they wouldn't play. But they joked about, they called him Fred Nugent and his guitar kind of artifice, or all these guitar gods. Rick loves Jeff Beck, who was kind of the guitar guy's guitar. I mean, that was another part of this was interesting in the story, is that the image they put out there, really kind of it did help and hurt them, and it definitely got them noticed. But in some ways, to some people, I mean, they are frozen in time as the four guys on stage at Budokan. And, Robin, again, will be obviously, I put in the book, the original Fast Times book that Cameron Crowe wrote when he went back to high school. The line that appears in the movie with Amy Heckerling's dialogue, there are a lot of girls here with the Pat Benatar look, including Blair Tefkin, who was in V. The book of it says actually there are all these guys here with the Robin Zander look. So what I thought was also so great about Cheaptrick is that I joke with people that it's like Pennywise, from It. They've always been there. They're like, wait, they were there. Like Rick is in Disorderlies, the Fat Boys movie. Like Rick was on, what's the Ben Savage? Boy Meets World. They appeared as themselves in Daddy Daycare. Obviously, they're people that only know them through the '70s show. Obviously, they're not from Wisconsin, but they kind of might as well be because they were centered in Madison. So even though it was done for the '70s show, Hello Wisconsin is also kind of very Cheaptrick. And even though that's
just the sheer number of movie soundtracks they're on.
Yeah.
I mean, they're on dozens of movie soundtracks.
Right. Now especially, right.
Yes.
Guardians of the Galaxy,
Yeah.
10 Things I Hate About You, great movie with the late Heath Ledger, Letters for Cleo,
they're everywhere.
They played on the Rooftop, which I know Rick had said, he took his grandkids. He has so many grandkids. I think the movie, and the first line of the movie, I can't remember who says it, is like, fuck. I put in the book, I mean, it was on an episode of Scrubs, or it was on an episode of Dawson's Creek, or, How I Met Your Mother, Ted Mosby, Josh Radnor's character, singing voices into the, to the phone drunkenly. And then, again, they were obviously in 4 songs went over the edge, which, is pretty amazing. And that movie, came out during the, kind of the panic over, gang movies, which included The Warriors. So people that movie got pulled, which made it almost more sinister. In fact, Kurt Cobain, who was also tied to Cheaptrick, kind of in a tangent way, he loved that movie. I mean, that movie, if you've seen it, I mean, it ends with them locking the parents literally into the high school and lighting on fire. I mean, they don't burn them, but they wanted to. And he had said for Smells Like Teen Spirit that was his concept, that he storyboarded that video to replicate that movie.
Tell us what Budokan did for Cheaptrick, because to be honest, the first 3 albums, they didn't sell that much.
Yeah, no, they did not at all. They did not. It cursed them and blessed them. I mean, the reality was like a character that an actor or actress plays that they'll forever be known for. It froze them in time for some people. I mean, to some people, it was like this shticky thing. Like, who are these guys with the screaming girls? Rick had always said, he had a very clear-headed view of their career, and he'd said, an interview that I put in the book with Howie Klein, who, was a writer. He later ran Reprise Records, but he interviewed them when they were out in the Old Waldorf in San Francisco, and the interview's on rocksbackpages.com. I know Brian Cramp had also posted some of it, and it's very interesting because Rick is kind of out of character, and he's kind of like, just more what I assume Rick would be like if the cameras weren't on him. Although he's probably interviewed every single day, and everywhere he goes, he's expected to be Rick Nielsen. But he says, like, I don't know that any of our albums are really going to be huge hits, but then like later on, people will be like, oh yeah, I remember those guys. And I think that's what Budokan did for some people. I mean, they had remembered, oh, we saw them open for this, or they blew away the openers there. Obviously, the Kiss tour with, with the Love Gun album is a huge thing. Although another Cheaptrick myth is that, they didn't put Kiss's name in the album or in Surrender to honor Gene Simmons. I mean, which is something Gene would say. They liked Kiss. I think in interviews, they thought Kiss was obviously more of a gimmick than they were. Ironically, I think Steve Albini said this as well. Cheaptrick's music, although they looked more, cotton candy-ish, probably was much harder edge than what Kiss was putting out.
Definitely.
But they also, were considering putting Queen in there, who was another band they opened for. That they respected Queen, they loved Queen's music, but they also thought that was kind of a gimmick too. Freddie being Freddie, and but you could say that about them. So what Budokan did was it broke them in a really kind of weird, kind of staggered way, because it wasn't supposed to be released, and Dream Police had been recorded already. It was in the can, as they like to say. So it's already they went back and did it in late '78 and finished it for sure. But the majority of it's already done. These
But
songs.
so they did not release. They held back on releasing Dream
Yeah, Dream
Police.
Police does not come out until September 21st, 1979, even though the majority of the album had been recorded before they left for Japan, and they finished it. I know Bun had said they did the studio version of Need Your Love on the same night that Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park and with airing, so that they did it really quickly. And some people think that song shouldn't appear on the album because they'd already done it on Budokan. Why do we need another version of the same song? But they ended up holding it back, and they kept holding it back. Epic did. It wasn't so much their choice, and I think this is really where, and I would like to hopefully write a second, volume, because when Cheap Trick hits, in some ways they're the least prepared to deal with it, because what ends up happening is this album that, the songs on Budokan, they had been playing now, since some of them since the beginning. I mean, it's a well-known fact that Rick had this, magical catalog of unlimited songs that that they were mining, and it's around the time of Dream Police. I know for Heaven Tonight, they were writing some of them and they were recording them without road testing them, but those were some of those songs were songs they had already, they had Surrender, previously. But by the time of Dream Police, some of that's running out, and I think they really felt kind of trapped, because what ends up happening is in real time they're essentially supporting this live album that they didn't really even want, and they're playing the same thing over and over again. They're not the Dead. I mean, Bunny has said, jokingly, they didn't have such a deep set list, but I think they really felt like, chained to that. And then at the same time, what Budokan did was, I think it upped a lot of the some of the tension, because it does sound like a cliche, like is today John Lennon's birthday? I don't know. Today, I think today's John Lennon's birthday. So obviously they were huge John Lennon fans, and as I put in the book, they loved all the different John Lennons, and as I think I alluded to, John Lennon got to be John Lennon because of his role in the Beatles. But they loved, Rick used to wear shirts early 1975. I'm not Paul. He also wore shirts that said "small dick." But that they loved, they loved the sinisterness of Lennon, and they loved Cold Turkey. And of course, another weird Cheap Trick kind of serendipity is Bun and Rick played on Double Fantasy, of course.
Right.
And the last electric guitar that John Lennon had was the one that Rick had given to him. I believe it was a Hamer. I'm not sure. I should know, but I think it's a Hamer. And then sadly, it was returned to him by Yoko after John Lennon was shot, which Rick had talked about. He found out about John Lennon being shot in a strip club on tour, because Monday Night Football, Howard Cosell famously had to cut in and make the announcement. But Budokan really was, like I said, a blessing and a curse, and it broke them. They were on the cover of, obviously Rolling Stone in 1979, when that was obviously the highest, honor you could receive. They were seemingly everywhere. I guess commercial, I guess if charts matter, I don't know if they were as big as maybe, were they as big as Frampton Comes Alive? I guess not, but I guess, again, Frampton's really the average person who's a Humble Five fan, or a blues fan. He's obviously known for a small handful of songs. So it really kind of messed them up. And then by 1980, when they probably should have been, celebrating Dream Police, and really kind of starting this new phase, they were really, chained down. And Tom was married to a German model named Dagmar. So I guess I was going with the Yoko analogy, but it was a troublesome marriage. I think it exacerbated a lot of the problems that, he felt. I think part of him either believed that he should be a bigger star, or she was telling him he should be a bigger star. And, he literally, the most Cheap Trick thing in the world, he left in the middle of their Canadian tour. I mean, they flew in Pete Comita, who was a guitar player, and they didn't even announce it, which is the most Cheap Trick thing. They just brought a guy that had similar hair, put him out on stage, and I found, obviously, so many reviews of that time, Vancouver newspapers. I mean, some people thought it was Tom Peterson, or he's on hiatus was another thing. Or Rick, of course, made the joke, well, he's on sick leave. We got sick of him, which it's a great joke, but I also think there's a lot of hurt there. Him and Tom were really close. So, that's one thing that a lot of people ask me about the book. Why don't you talk to them? Why don't you get more of like stuff on the record? And I was like, they're never going to go on the record about some of
Yeah,
this.
they're not that type. So John Brandt came in. Comida on Standing on the Edge? Who
I don't
or
think Brand. I mean, Kamita, I don't think really
is
played.
on a
I know. When All Shook Up, they, that Rick had to do a lot of the actual bass parts.
okay. All right.
Which, again, in another Cheap Trick, double-edged, sword thing. They do an album with George Martin. Obviously and again, at this point, once they had broken through Budokan, they can admit, yeah, we're huge Beatles fans.
Yeah.
Obviously, yes, obviously, the song "Taxman" and "Mr. Heath" is a reference to the Beatles. We're not trying to be the Beatles, and being the American Beatles or a Beatles ripoff, I put in the book. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when Beatlemania was on Broadway. Like now, the Cirque du Soleil type, tributes and everything are so commonplace. But back then, I think the Beatles cast a huge shadow, obviously. So to be called the American Beatles, it's like the way Springsteen was called the next Dylan for a long time. That's not a great thing to carry around. And
yeah, that's a lot.
It was used as a way to kind of chip away at their originality, and that was a huge thing with Cheap Trick. Oh, they're cribbing this from this part. I mean, there are people, like I said, Dave Marsh, who obviously was huge with Cream Magazine and Rolling Stone, and obviously does a lot of semi-authorized Springsteen biographies now. And he'd written about, well, he felt they mind, this part of "I'm So Heavy" and this part from, I mean, like specific, like, actual like pieces to get their sound, and that also I think hurt them. Because I think those allegations hurt, because again, they weren't some like cheesy kind of rip-off band. They were they were a bunch of music geeks, really. They owned every single pressing of everything, especially Bun and Rick. And they use those things to put into their own music. But for some people, the mere fact that they were melodic and loud, therein lies, the John Lennon or Beatles analogy. Yeah. And as Bun had put in a couple interviews, back then you couldn't be both. You couldn't be loud and melodic, and you couldn't look like Robin Zander, but also have Rick, Rick and Bun. And so it really was in some ways kind of a millstone, which is a shame, because the Budokan, the accomplishment is amazing. The story of how it actually finally came to be is also very cool. The way that it was in the import markets, it was in all the it was being played on BCN and all these, it was being played. Obviously, you can hear in the bootlegs that Rick alludes to, he'll say it during the show, like, "Oh, we're gonna play Need Your Love," and it's on this album that we hear is hard to find. Elicits great applause, but they never really wanted it, I think, to come out, and then it became the thing that they're always talked about. And I there's a great interview that I use, but I probably would use more of it if I do a second volume, when they come back to Japan in 1988, and they're doing an interview for Rockin' On, which was, I think it's still in publication. It's the Japanese music magazine that nobody really talks about, and it was translated by a guy named Steve Harris. And Rick, again, sounds very not like he's being interviewed. He sounds very chill. Maybe it's because he just finished the show, or and they talk about just a lot of the the weight of the success. And there's a great line in there. Why didn't you guys come back to Japan for 10 years? He's like, because they didn't ask us.
Yeah.
He's like, everywhere we go, he's like, we are asked about Budokan. That's literally like the thing. And he's like, and you would think that, like, we built the Budokan, and I think it became really annoying for them. And I think, you mentioned One-on-One, and they obviously jumped from producer to producer during the 80s. I mean, something that I think is so interesting about them is they were like an 80s in terms of video. They were like a made for 80s band before there was an 80s. In some ways they'd be perfect, because they were these goofy guys. Like, they weren't, they were serious musically, but obviously on screen they could be, very Hard Day's Night, kind of like,
totally
around. And yet during the 80s, going from producer to producer, they kind of became, I think, sort of a compromised version of what they were. And again, I think maybe that's because some of the songs weren't as good. Obviously, the record company started kind of forcing them to accept outside songwriters.
Right.
The Claim is very interesting because that wasn't their song. And so, again, 10 years after Budokan, they are now back in the spotlight with something that they're not really that into. And, they wouldn't even play it, originally for the first couple of years. It wasn't even the set list. And I don't love The Flame. I mean, it has a good guitar solo, but it's just their story, and why I hope I kind of get to continue is they keep trying to become, relevant. And in some ways they do, because in the mid 90s, they become, even though Rick would hate this analogy, kind of the Midwestern version of the Dead, where there are people following them around, hoping for like nuggets, hoping they'll dust off fan club, taping them. I talk, they have their share of tapers. They, had their own conventions, much like comic book fans and Kiss. They had the Trick Fest where they would do, obviously insanely rare stuff. They would have Q&As. I don't know if they necessarily were merchandising booths, but and then in 1997 they come out with an album that's self-titled 20 years after.
Which, by the way, is awesome. Yeah, I bought it in a cut. I paid 99 cents for it at a Hastings. I knew nothing about it. I see this album that just says Cheaptrick with the picture of, and so probably around,
they're actually, they don't appear on it. It's
around 2000. I just found it. I didn't even know about it.
It is great, and this is another great, like, Cheaptrick fans who are watching this, be like, yeah, well, obviously he's going to talk about that. I mean, it was this great album that came in 1997. Obviously at that time now, music is now becoming more harder edged, more, the people like the rough parts. Every single band who is popular is saying how much they love Cheaptrick. Not the Cheaptrick of the Flame, but the Cheaptrick of the Jack Douglas album, 1977.
Totally. Yep.
You're getting name dropped, obviously, in everything, whether it be, obviously, Mike McCready wrote the foreword to the book. And again, he did it for Cheaptrick. I don't think he did, for me, we've never met, but obviously, Jeff Ament wrote the one for Brian's book. Billy Joe Armstrong is a huge Cheaptrick fan. Mickey Six is a huge Cheaptrick fan. I just saw What's Left of Everclear out here on Long Island. Art is an enormous Cheap. I mean, they are, Steve West of Danger is huge. I mean, they're people, they're Rick jokes that they're everybody's fifth favorite band, right? That's one of his other longtime jokes, which I guess he puts the Who, the Beatles, the Stones, and AC/DC ahead of them. He doesn't put Zeppelin ahead of them.
But you know what? That's really true when you think about all the people that were influenced by Cheap Trick. That's totally true. Billy Corgan, you might even talk about this in your book. I haven't got there yet, but Billy Corgan at the beginning of the Music for Hangovers video, where Billy Corgan comes out and plays a solo. There's that little written piece where he's talking about, I went to a fair and I just knew they did The Flame, which I thought was a lame song. And then he goes and sees it and he's like, these guys are awesome. And that's kind of the story of their career, right? Is if all you know are the few songs that got played on the radio, you're missing
100%.
You're missing the story.
And I do think, obviously I mentioned, Fast Times, because even though they don't appear in the movie, and again, they're aware of this. So like when they did the Dream Police tour without Bun in 2011, they did kind of a Cheaptrick in the movies, like a middle, like a intro where, it's through the reference on The Simpsons a lot. Homer, obviously when Apu was still appropriate to have Hank Azaria's character is watching the Dream Police. Obviously, Mike Damone's speech about them, which I use in the book, which, is one of the most quoted things in the movie. If I say Cheap Trick to a lot of people, they're like, oh, Fast Times. And they're aware of that. But I assume it's also like, again, it's somewhat at times probably frustrating because they're referenced by everybody, even though they were seen as stealing from their influences. And you mentioned like the 1997 album. I think that was very frustrating because it comes out at Red Hand Records, which immediately goes bankrupt.
Which goes,
and then the following year, you mentioned the Music for Hangovers. They now, and I don't think they did it like, against their will, but they go back now and start playing really the first album shows of any band. I mean, I've seen Springsteen do The River start to finish the first time he did it. I saw him do Born to Run. I mean, nobody was doing that in 1998. Here they are going back to clubs, playing. And
they do the Music for Hangovers. For those that don't know, one night they did the first album. The next night it was In Color, and the third night it was Heaven Tonight. It was awesome.
And they did Budokan, and they did the expanded Budokan that they were releasing. So they were doing, I don't think it's 22 songs. They were doing all the songs. So so people only knew them from like, Come On, Look Out, Ain't That a Shame. Now they're doing, Freezing. They're doing, I think they might be doing High Roller. I mean, they're doing songs that, again, the average person. They were doing it with the Metro. That's obviously where that album comes from. And they did it all over. They were going to do it apparently in Central Park, but no surprise.
And now everyone does those now.
100%.
Everyone does. They're going to play this album. I saw Def Leppard a month ago. They played Pyromania in its entirety. Same.
And for them, I mean, it's cool because they got to dust off, obviously, songs they hadn't performed in a while. But again, they were probably somewhat frustrated. Like, here we just did this new stuff that is so great. And they played some of the songs at the end of those shows. But, like, now we're immediately kind of mining our past, you know? And they continue, obviously, to make albums. And obviously, the breakup with Bun was not at all, you know.
So let's talk about. I have to throw this out there just because this is the type of band they are, right? I mentioned I saw them in '82. I saw them. I was an Army brat, so kind of moved around. So in '82, I saw them here in Spokane, Washington, where I live. '83 or '84, I saw them in Lawton, Oklahoma, the town I lived in. Then I saw them again, like probably in '85 in Lawton, Oklahoma. Just being in Spokane without traveling anywhere.
Yeah.
I can see Cheaptrick about every 2 years.
Yeah, pretty much.
Just coming to play someplace locally, and they've never stopped doing that. And there are been the Rockford album that's just a fantastic album.
Yeah, with the cartoons and everything, and
they keep putting great albums out.
Yeah. And then they sound like Cheaptrick, and I think that also, you know, was one of the reasons that the original four, you know, stopped touring, was because I don't think that Bun wanted to keep touring. I mean, certainly that I don't think was debatable. But unfortunately, and I put in the book that, you know, and this might be me looking for kind of a third act relevance, but in some ways it was the Beatles that kind of brought this out, because they played the Sgt. Pepper shows, which is funny because, as people have pointed out, they were accused of being a Beatles ripoff, but most of the songs of Sgt. Pepper, the Beatles never tried to play live.
Yeah.
The Sgt. Pepper Beatles album that Cheaptrick did, I mean, it's amazing. And they do insanely, not even faithful renditions of these songs. So if they'd ever wanted to be a Beatles cover band, they would have been completely amazing. And it's songs the Beatles never played.
Yeah.
But Bun didn't want to keep touring, and I think the other three did, or, you know, felt they had to. And then I think Bum wanted to do, obviously, a longer set of shows because he had a back surgery. He thought, we're going to do the Sgt. Pepper thing, let's really. And now, you know, it makes sense. A residency is very common for these bands. But that's when I think a lot of kind of like Bad Blood, you know, came out, where, you know, him and Rob and you know, kind of went back and forth. And one of the genius things is that, you know, during Japan, that Robin and Bun were roommates. So Tom and you know, Rick, you know, roomed together, and Robin and Tom, you know, Robin and Bun, who look the most diametrically opposed people, you know, the sex symbol, and you know, and again, I don't think Bun loved always being called, like, you know, the chubby accountant. I do put in the book, you saw like 2 pages worth of descriptions of him that are, you know, pretty much every blue collar job. He was constantly, some of them I didn't use, where, you know, he's referred to as, you know, a Nazi in a high, just because of the mustache, like a Nazi in a banana plantation. You know, but I think that really, you know, led to, obviously, a kind of acrimonious end. And then Bun, you know, wanted, obviously, he was told he was going to keep his share of the business, and they stopped sending him the check, so he had to sue them.
Yeah.
Which, again, you know, people say, well, you know, would you ever? I mean, I don't want them to really talk on those things. I mean, I think, you know, again, I put in the book in the beginning that, you know, they have the same kind of ego access that every other rock band at that time has. The difference is they try to act like sometimes they don't. You know, it's funny because Rick, if you see him interviewed, he'll say, if people say, oh, you were the one band that never did drugs, he's like, that's not true. He's like, you know, and Robin will joke, like, we just never stopped doing drugs. But but I think that they always felt like, we don't want to be a cliche. So they saw, like, Aerosmith going in on a rehab as a cliche. But I mean, you know, obviously they had their things, and if people want, like, you know, to find the dirt on them, I mean, I don't think people care, you know, so much that Rick has worn a hat and hasn't had a full head of hair since 1975.
Yeah.
I think he kind of still does, which is weird. It's like Santana. I don't really care what's under the hat, and that's not why I'm going to see Cheaptrick.
Right.
But you know, I think, you know, that's another thing about them, is that, you know, I've seen interviews with them where, you know, Rick will say, like, we're not angels, and he doesn't want to be painted that way. But at the same time, you know, they had always kind of tried to steer people away from. I just think because they like to keep certain things, you know, obviously in a house, and that's really, I think, what led, also, you know, the situation with Bun is once they got into the Hall of Fame, and once their dirty laundry started coming out, I mean, you know, it was pretty clear they did do right by the fans by the four of them performing together.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't think, I'm sure there's still a lot of hurt there. I don't think that the four of them, will ever step on stage together.
Yeah, and that's before I ask you this next question about Bun. I posted a comment here from a friend of mine, Will. He and I attended a Cheaptrick concert together in about 85. Will, I think
Yeah,
that is
probably
front row, general admission. So we were right up in kind of Robin, and they were extremely loud.
Yeah.
They have always been a very loud band.
Very loud.
Just everyone to
who level loud, who obviously idolized the Who.
Absolutely, really loud, like one of the loudest concerts.
Like purple level, yeah. And especially then when they were playing, obviously to state fairs and a lot of Six Flags. They were. Yep. They definitely weren't worried so much about the presentation, and I think, they were probably really letting it.
Really loud. So you kind of were going there, but what is both the? You kind of talked about the personal. What's the legal relationship between Bun and the band right now?
I think like every settlement, I think it's private, so
okay,
we don't know. But what I assume, at least what was made public, was that Bun had been, he had back surgery, so Dax had played drums with the band, I think in like 2001, and then simultaneously the shows got a little bit longer and they got into a little more deep cuts, and Bun had said that wasn't quite his thing. And then around 2010, I guess and I think what happened was that before that they had the Sgt. Pepper shows, and I think him and Robin, Bun has said that he basically, when Robin said he pull his kids out of kindergarten, and Bun is a very proud uncle, but he's not a parent, so he said something, and he made fun of Robin's voice in a whiny voice and said well, now we're gonna worry about kids fucking kindergarten now.
Yeah.
And I think that really pissed off. That was the last straw. But then when he stopped touring, which I do think he just wanted to stop touring, they just stopped sending him his checks, like the share. Wow. So he had to sue them, and it was pretty public. And what I assume happened was that there was a settlement, and then now Bun, he has recorded everything. Bun has recorded, every practice session. And then when they were still, the four of them together, there was the Bunny bootleg series, which you might have seen, which was a fan club, kind of only. And now, I do think that this is something that has been worked out. I don't think it's between the band members. I think it's between the Cheaptrick brand and Bun. Now he has been releasing over the last couple of years on YouTube every Monday, the new bootleg series, which is crazy because it has everything. It has practice sessions, Dream Police without the words. So I think there's some kind of quasi settlement there. I will say, like I said, Buddy Carlos always struck me as the coolest guy in Cheaptrick and the most sincere. Nothing I ever got from him I ever felt wasn't true. And he does, he goes to Robin Taylor Xander's shows.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty, I always say he's classy around Burgundy, because I don't anticipate that the other three will ever interact with him, which is a shame. And they were never best friends. I mean, Robin, Tom and Rick were good friends, but that is a shame. But like I said, I don't think Bun wants to be on the road anymore. I know that. I don't think that was ever for him. And somebody pointed out, I mean, the drummer, it take a beating, beating on the skin. So that's usually physically taxing. I mean, I'm sure Rick also, I've seen a couple of shows where I don't think he loves having to put on the 5-neck guitar. I mean, that thing is pretty.
Totally.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's where things stand. They continue to tour. Their 50th anniversary is coming on. They did do at the Strat out in Vegas, kind of before the Sphere became a thing. They did 3 shows, obviously again without Bun, where they did kind of an 80s show, a 90s show. So they do understand there are people that are absolutely obsessed with the set lists. And when you see them now, unless it's a headliner show, when we were opening for Rod Stewart or they were opening for Hart before, they had to take a break, obviously for I don't know if it was Anna or Nancy, but she's okay, thankfully. I mean, you're going to get those songs like you talked about. You're going to get the same 8 songs. You're going to get, you're going to get, obviously, Hello There, Come On, obviously Flame, I Want You Want Me, Surrender. So, and they continue to put albums out. again, for me, it's not quite the same without Bun. I don't think, I mean, Dak seems to be like a super nice kid, and I think he really liked, Bun, and I don't think he, and for any second, wants to be known as the guy that someone took Bun's job. I don't think that's the case at all. Like, I don't think, I mean, he was put in a really uncomfortable situation. I don't think he, I mean, he grew up a Cheap Trick fan. I think, I believe Dax was born. I think when I think it was when Rick played with John Lennon. I think that's always been his story.
Wow.
Is that
Yeah.
he blew that off. That was I put it in the book that Rick has always said that John Lennon playing with John Lennon was his hall pass, which I don't think Rick understands what a hall pass is.
Yeah.
Because he tells sex jokes all the time, and I think someone needs to tell him that's not what a hall pass is.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dax, I believe, was born during the double fantasy session for Bun.
So this was right before 9/11. That's how I reference it. It's probably August of 2001. Cheap Trick again, just sitting in Spokane. If I wait every 2 years, they're going to show up somewhere. So they played at an old called Playfair. It used to be an old horse racing track. Now it's just a big field. So they played a show there. Georgia Satellites were opening, and Rick's sons had a band, Dax, and I can't remember.
Nielsen Trust, I believe they're called.
What were they called?
The Nielsen Trust, I believe.
Yes,
is one of their projects. He's got a lot of projects.
Might have been, but it was his son, and then Dax was on drums. And this was, I think Bun was out for back problems at this time because Dax was the drummer. Yeah. So 2 songs in, okay, we listened to the Nielsen Boys band, then Georgia Satellites, then Trick. And of course, there's no one there. I mean, there's like 500 people there. It was kind of sad. But I'm right up on the front row. 2 songs in, Robin Nielsen loses his voice. He's done. He can't sing anymore. And so Rick's son came up and sang the whole set.
Wow.
It was just a weird little one-off.
I mean, there are Cheap Trick set list sites. I mean, I can totally see that. Yeah. It's funny because Robin, that was always kind of another running dialogue was that Robin never really took care of his voice.
Yeah.
Never needed to. Steve Albini had said he was still like smoking Camel nails in the mid-90s. Yeah. Now I think, and again, I mean, who knows how any of us would be, in our 70s. Now I think that, his voice is going a little bit, which I think is why Robin Taylor Xander is there. Because when I've seen them, ironically, or not ironically, frustratingly, Down, which is one of my favorite songs, Robin doesn't sing at all. His son sings it, which, that was on the original reissue of Budokan. That's obviously, one of the earliest great hits. Again, so like very Cheap Trick, like on a Live in a Mountain in Australia. It's either Life or Suicide. But you can hear sort of when they sing, that Robin Taylor Xander kind of, it's almost like scaffolding for, for Robin.
Yeah. Just
so it's right. So it's, and again, I mean, not everybody can be Mick Jagger, and he's, avoided any type of vocal strain for so long. So, I mean, they still put on a great show. I didn't see them for a while before writing the book. I'd stopped seeing them when Bun left, and I used to always say, like, no Bunny Carlos, no give a shit. Which is what I always say about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame when they post something. I say, no Warren Zevon, no give a shit. And I will continue to do so. But they still put on a great show. But again, like you said, and I think now, they still do a lot of the package tours. I mean, there are people that only want to see them as headliners. I think I was interacting today with a guy who wrote for New Musical Express in '86, and near the end of the book, I mentioned how they now were opening for like Motley Crue, and these guys grew up idolizing them. But like, I think Rick was kind of like, huh? Like, I don't even know what we have in common with you.
Yeah.
But I think they did bother them. I mean, they would he would always brush it off and say they didn't care. But like, I mean, you 10 years after Budokan, you're opening for Rat.
Yeah.
Like, I can't imagine. I mean, and that doesn't happen to a lot of bands, I guess. I mean, I'm trying to think, like...
I think we notice it with Cheap Trick because they've never stopped, right? Some of these other bands that maybe would have been big, well, they just kind of fizzled out.
Right. And again, when being on the cover of Rolling Stone was such an exclusive honor, I mean, who has reached those heights? And they, like you said, I mean, I mean, they're the kind of band, like, they were knocked down, and that's kind of going back to Rick's, we just keep touring. I mean, and they just kept going. So, but it's funny because I found an article in the Buffalo News from 1990, which this is when the Cheaptrick Heart tour was announced last year, and it's from 1990, and the writer was saying like it's ridiculous. Watch the Cheaptrick have to open for Heart. They're so much better than Heart, and I'm like, this is literally the exact same thing 34 years ago.
Yeah, that's exactly how it's been.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, with at least obviously they got into the Hall of Fame on their first nomination. It just took 13 years for them to get nominated.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Billy Corgan, the late Taylor Hawkins, Dave Grohl, obviously McCready. I mean, they all kind of pitched in and were pushing for Cheaptrick to get in.
Yeah, and if you think from mid 70s to mid 80s, in my mind, if you went to concerts, there's a very good chance you were going to see Cheaptrick open or UFO. Those two bands. You should write a book about UFO, Ross.
I'll tell you, it's funny because that I did put in there because Bun did say, we always one of the Cheaptrick rules was they never drank during the show, but they would say like when it was over we drank our fucking heads off. I mean, Rick has been sober now since early 2000s. He never talks about how he got there, even though he's a vodka ambassador. But Bun had said when they toured with the UFO in 1981, he was like, that was the party dog tour. He said, I think I put in the book, he's like, we saw a lot of sunrises on that tour. He's like, those guys. And then, I mean, it was interesting also, like, even in 88 when they were hanging out with, Guns N' Roses during their ascent. Rick has told the story before of, he punching Slash in the face because he was so wasted. In Nikki Sixx's book, The Heroin Diaries, he talks about peeing on that. Basically the story was that Rick had this like rubber raincoat that he bought at some kind of like cool hipster shop, and Nikki was obviously completely nobody knew on heroin. And they talk about, I think they were hanging out with Queen, and but I do know, and Bun did an interview I saw in the late 80s. He's on those, GNR. He's like, those guys really need to watch it. He's like, they're going to be the way they party.
Yeah. So Ross, what do you see? I mean, are they going to be wrapping it up soon? Or
I can't imagine. I mean, I knowing them, I can't imagine them doing that. I think. Again, I'm not really in contact with the organization. I mean, there are people that want them to commemorate, let's say, their anniversary. Like I said, they definitely. I can't imagine a scenario in which they would play with Bun. And again, it's not like when they got David Lee Roth to come back to Van Halen. I mean, there are people that would love to see it, would pay to see it,
right?
But I just think there's just too much acrimony there. So I don't know. What I think will happen is they'll just keep making albums as a vehicle to get out there and to feel relevant. I don't know. Like, I can't imagine them stopping. I mean,
they've never stopped, right? They've always been playing. They've always been putting out records.
And I think like I said, I said it in a Newsday interview, which and I don't know this for a fact, but I mean, I assume obviously Rick is probably the most financially secure. Because I mean, obviously he, I can't imagine. Well, he did sell off the catalog, the songwriting catalog. He's one of the earlier ones, which didn't get a lot of hype compared to other people doing, like Bruce doing it. But he, obviously he's collected everything. He has like coin collections that are probably been on every, and again, he just helped open up the Rockford Hard Rock Cafe, which is again basically like the Illinois version of Margaritaville. So, they do. Him and Rama do very much have I think probably does. He's asking about the Geddy Lee Les Paul. I mean, Rick's guitar collection, is I can't imagine
world famous. I'm
sure it's insured, and it's. I mean, again, much like everything Cheaptrick, it was always kind of like, sometimes it was exaggerated, but I think he obviously has been collecting them.
And Rick, you mentioned in the book, he's been married since like 1960.
Yeah.
Wow.
How
hard would that be, to keep a marriage together?
I mean, and I think it wasn't. It might have been an episode on TV Cribs, but him and Karen appeared on some show, and she has joked about, I think, being tolerant, but Rick was never obviously trying to push like the sex symbol image, but I mean, he in the very beginning, he was married, and I joked that he was. He had the personality of a dirty grandpa long before he actually had kids. Now he does have kids, and grandkids. But yeah, I think I mentioned that you could see, he was wearing a wedding ring at times. And again, I don't think he was the first one that the girls were certainly going after. But
Exactly.
again,
Yeah.
if he was asked, he would obviously say that, he wasn't married, or obviously they never would say they were from Rockford, which again, which is very interesting. I think it was in '77 they played a show. I don't know if it was on Halloween, maybe, but that's what the bootleg says. And Ram Jam is on the bill, and like
Yeah.
they put like Rockford, and then like on the poster you can see it's like crossed out, like a hometown show, like where like it was still kind of a tongue in cheek thing. Like,
Yeah.
they didn't want to say they were, because Rockford was really struggling also, and again, it was much cooler to be, from Chicago or Madison.
Exactly.
Which they were, a lot of times built out of Madison too early. They didn't become this Rockford export until later, until they kind of, owned up to everything.
Yeah. Well, and they finally made an album called
Yeah,
Rockford. Right?
exactly. And then when they got into the Hall of Fame, they renamed the streets
Yeah.
for them. But
It's awesome.
yeah, I mean, Rick obviously has lived there forever. Bun lives in Illinois, I believe, or he plays a lot in Madison. Robin has been out in St. Petersburg forever.
Yeah, he's been in Florida a long time. So,
I don't know if Tom still lives in the city or not, but I mean, Tom he does a lot of charities. He has, an autistic son. He had open heart surgery.
He's a very big. I have a son with special needs, so I've kind of followed what Tom has done with his work with autism. It's awesome. He's a great advocate.
I remember seeing. I remember seeing it in teaching class. Yeah, Stephen Stills also, I believe. I forget. If I'm not mistaken, because I remember watching a movie. I've been also teaching for 28 years, and I remember seeing a movie. I believe it was an autism, and it wasn't even like Bill. There was just like, oh, here's the husband. And I was like, it's Stephen Stills.
Wow.
Like, I'll have to double check that. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, but Tom.
That's like when you go back to that documentary from 1969 about in Canada, and Alex Lifeson is in it. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Just a kid fighting with his parents. It's just a documentary, and it's Alex Lifeson before he was in Rush. I just thought that's so random. Yeah. Anyways, so let me ask you this before we wrap up here. What's next for you, Ross? What do you got in the works?
Well, I mean, I'd like to just take, the year to chill. I have a daughter who just started a fresh year in college.
Awesome.
And I have a son who is in the 8th grade. But I mean, I would like, I did enough research and I wrote enough originally, because the biggest complaint I've got is it's too short, right? And that was, the publisher told me, like, it has to be, come in at a certain length. And then, of course, I kind of sneakily, which isn't a word, came back and put all these random references in there that I thought were important. Like, I thought it was important to mention Howard Hessman was in a TV movie about tarantulas. I thought that had to stay in the book.
Yeah.
It's like that Key and Peele sketch about Gremlins too. Like, it's going in the sequel. Now, I mean, I think there's a lot more to say about Cheaptrick, and I think there's another angle I could come at it from. I don't know, if the same publisher, they had told me they weren't interested in doing a second volume. I mean, it wouldn't just be on like the shitty years. I mean, I was always like, I originally was like, am I gonna have to write a book that's just on like Up the Creek, or just like on Mighty Wind? I mean, although I do think it's fascinating, but I think, I definitely could write a book, like I said, that starts at the pinnacle, and then obviously alludes to the fact that here's this band ready-made for the 80s, and here comes the 80s, and all this stuff happens to them. And again, it's a Rick quote. I think it came from the LA Times. We've been literally down more than we've been up. We've been coming back more than we've been on top. So I do think I'd like to write like another book on them, because the book has been well received, and people who have read it and who were there really have liked it. So I'll see how it goes. And I jokingly said I would call it Too Dumb to Quit, the Fallen Rise. Another Rick quote, we're too dumb to quit.
That's good.
And then eventually I'd also like to revisit, kind of the other side of my writing, which, like I said, I wrote a book called Drunk on Sunday, which is available to small publisher in Buffalo, which actually comes from the Ray Nitschke, the Packers legend. His memoir was called Mean on Sunday. So I wrote a book. And it's a fictionalized account, but not that fictionalized, of 138 Dead shows, growing up with the Chargers. There was originally some Cheaptrick in one of the chapters, but didn't end up making it in. I did make a reference to them. I mean, I have seen a fair amount of Cheaptrick shows with my wife. But I would like to maybe get back to that. I do have a hangover on Monday sequel planned, which would, I don't know that I'd do a third book, because nobody needs to hear about me getting a colonoscopy at age 50. Like, that's not fun.
Yeah. Hey, I get a colonoscopy every year, and I have for the last 10 years. So
wow.
Too much information, I know.
Yes, I was going to say, I did, the Cologuard people will be calling you to see if you'll poop your butt.
Exactly. Yeah, no. So I want to just show this book one more time, guys. This is the book. It's American Standard, Cheap Trick from the Bars to Budokan and Beyond. Ross Warner has been our guest. I super appreciate this. And by the way, you talked to Jeb Wright.
Yes.
And we had Jeb Wright. We
Yeah,
interviewed
well, Jeb also. I know Jeb is. I know he wrote a book that's not about rock, and I know he's also a Chiefs fan, so I'm sure I have some beef with him.
Yeah. So we had Jeb Wright.
That was his. That was okay. So you can put me in touch with him because his interview was the one. Yeah, I did take his book out of the library, and his interview was the one with Rick, where Rick says, awesome. "Yeah, of course we left the hotel." And I did use a quote in there that Jeb got it, which was very good, where Rick said, yeah, you know what? The "I want you to want me" thing is like half true, half not true, which he never really says. He says, songs don't just happen that way.
Right.
But yeah, no, what was the blog that Jeb, was it Classic Rock Revisited? It was
Classic Rock Revisited. He kind of shut down about 2 years ago. He wrote the book. I mean, the website's still there, but he's not interviewing people or doing anything. But it was a great interview. So that's one of our
older. Yeah. I mean, if you have his contact information,
I can definitely do that. Yeah,
I'll send him a copy because I did. I mean, I went back to a lot. He had a lot of, and clearly he spoke to Bun. I mean, and that was a very a lot of the stuff that I used. And Bun has said it in a couple interviews. But yeah, specifically like this is how we got the name. No, we didn't get it at a Slade concert. We were just coming up with a name. We just had Cheap Trick. It wasn't meant to mean that, yes, there's a double entendre, but he clearly got a lot of good stuff out of both Rick and Bun, which is no small feat. So
yeah, for sure. So, well, congratulations on your Mets winning tonight. I'm glad this book is doing well. It's really an awesome book. So if you're a Cheap Trick fan,
or a Pearl Jam fan, because it does have the Mike McCready forward,
and yeah, Mike McCready does the forward on it.
They did. I did send him, Ed, and Jeff copies of it that they just got today to the 10 Club. So, and there is a part in there about how during that tour in '98, when they were, of course, playing the albums, that they played Crocodile in Seattle, and then on the last night, much as the Smashing Pumpkins did, Pearl Jam came out as the unannounced opener, and so that was like a huge deal for obviously people that were there, and the show itself sounds great, and obviously it was a huge honor for them. So if you like Pearl Jam, there's definitely Pearl Jam adjacent, and there is some stuff in there about obviously Nirvana as well, and ironically they were in Japan, Rick and Robin, promoting "Wake Up with a Monster" when and you can find the video, or I can send it to you, when Kurt Cobain died, and it's very weird because they're asking them about it as they're promoting this album, and Rick on one hand wants to get in there, that Kurt Cobain said he loved Cheap Trick, which he did, although he didn't say that Cheap Trick, that Nirvana was Cheap Trick with just loud guitars. What he said was we could have been Cheap Trick or the Knack, is what he said. But Rick says that, but then you can see he's legitimately, obviously, ashen and horrified because he's just learned about it that morning, and he does say how every generation has their martyr, their Morrison. But and again, and also Taylor Hawkins was a huge Cheap Trick fan.
So many of the modern bands, especially the grunge bands, surprisingly, very much influenced by Cheap Trick. So, Ross, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
We'll stay in touch.
Please, yeah.
Some other pop culture things we might need to pick your brain on.
I was on remote control in 1989. How's that?
There you go. Hey, there you go. Nice. Very good. I love that. So, well, awesome. Thank you so much. And we'll definitely be in.
All right, cool. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Live long and prosper. We'll see you. Bye-bye.